You can't be able to see my screen, right?
Yeah,
Are you able to see my screen? Perfect. So I think we can get started. So as I had mentioned yesterday, today I want us to start looking at JavaScript. So we have looked at HTML, which allows us to be able to publish content over the internet. We've also looked at CSS, which allows us to be able to format that content in ways that we would like to. So today, or from today rather, I want us to look at JavaScript, which will actually allow us to program behavior as far as our web pages are concerned. And this is very powerful because it is the one that now ties everything together. Okay, so JavaScript. Welcome to the world of JavaScript. Now, most people confuse JavaScript with Java. JavaScript is not the same language as Java, in as much as they all have the word Java in them. They are totally different things, just like car and carpet. Okay, they have absolutely no relationship. The word car appears in both of them, but they are not the same thing. JavaScript is a translated language, which means that it is translated one line after a time as it loads on the browser or whichever engine that is running it, because nowadays we have other places where you can run JavaScript rather than just the browser. So you can run Node.js and it allows you to be able to run JavaScript natively outside a browser. But of course, in most cases, we're going to be running our JavaScript inside a browser, so it's going to be translated one line after the other. JavaScript comes in very many versions. The initial one was launched in 1997 up to around 1991. 2001 rather, we call it ES1 or ECMAScript 1. ECMAScript is the organization of the foundation that actually founded JavaScript. So ECMAScript is ES. So when I say ES, I mean ECMAScript. It's European Commission for something. I'm really not quite familiar with the name in full as of the moment, but that is not really a big deal. So ES1 was from 1997 to around 2000, 2001. Then we had ES5, which came out in 2009. Then we have the modern version of JavaScript, which is ES6, which literally came out in 2015. And from 2016 year on, they have been using ES6 but with increment of the year. So as you're speaking right now, we have JavaScript ES6 2025, something of the sort. But ES6 is fairly standard. The only thing they do is they just add new features as we go along. Now, as part of this training, we're going to be looking at JavaScript. Mostly, we'll focus on ES5 and a few features of ES6 where necessary. Things like fat arrows and stuff like that. So destructuring and all that kind of stuff. We're going to look at how these things work differently for the different versions of JavaScript that are available. So that is generally going to be our agenda for today. So, why do we need JavaScript? Because that's a very important question. At least for HTML, you've seen it helps us to be able to publish the content. We can create forms, we can create paragraphs, we can add images, we can add links, we can add tables and lists and create navigation and do all these kinds of things. CSS will help us apply styles to them, change their background, change their font sizes, change their font colors, and all these kinds of things. JavaScript, on the other hand, will now make it possible for us to be able to change or update part of the DOM, document object model, without necessarily doing a full page refresh. So, for example, you can fetch data from remotely and come and just update a portion of the page. It can allow us to run functions and do things like calculations. For example, I might want to calculate taxes. Say you input this and I calculate for you the taxes and I give you the feedback. So that kind of interaction is possible with JavaScript. Then it also helps us to validate data. Like when I have forms and I need to be able to make sure that these forms are filled in, then that way I can be able to check if the user has provided the correct email address, whether they have provided a value instead of a number, they have provided a range that is acceptable, and all these kinds of stuff. So JavaScript allows you to do that. And of course, most importantly, it allows you to be able to fetch remote data. I can go to a server, get data, and come back and update that data as far as my web pages are concerned. So that is the power of JavaScript, and you can see this is a really powerful technology. Now, I'll go straight into our application because that's just a primer on what we are going to handle as far as JavaScript is concerned. So I'll go straight into our application, then we'll start looking at how JavaScript actually works. So I'll use Visual Studio Code as usual over here. Sorry, I'm supposed to launch it. Visual Studio Code as an application here. Then I will open our folder, which is visual programming here. Then I'll probably come to this and I'll now start doing what? Okay, visual programming. That's okay. I don't know where this attribution came from. Oh, this font. Awesome. Okay, that's okay. So at the moment, we don't have any JavaScript inside our folders except for that attribution from font awesome. So I'll simply create a file here and I'll call it and please, I told you to accept invitation I sent over the mail so that when joining the meeting, you don't interrupt others. Please kindly just do that. Okay, nonetheless, I think we can carry on. So I want us to look at JavaScript, and this is going to be interesting. So I'll close all the windows that are open here so that we don't have any windows open. Then I will create a folder here. No, well, maybe not create a folder. Let me just call it a JS introduction.html. So I want us to do all our JavaScript inside here. So I'll start emit, um, emit, then I'll fill it in. I'll say intro to JavaScript. I'll call it JS moving forward because JavaScript, that's what it means in full. Now, the first thing I want us to understand is how do we add JavaScript on our pages? How to add JavaScript on pages. Now, there are two ways you can add JavaScript on your pages. You can add it at the top of the page. Uh, Nowadays, it's not a big deal, but previously it was a big deal because what used to happen is that we wanted to be able to make sure that everything else loads before JavaScript is loaded. So we usually had to put it at the bottom here. But nowadays, it's not a big deal. When you put it at the top and the browser realizes that this is JavaScript, it will probably delay loading it until everything else loads. But of course, as good practice, we can add JavaScript at the bottom here. So what you do, for you to add JavaScript, you will use the script tag like that. Then you're going to put all your JavaScript in between. Just like we're using style tag to add all our CSS, we are going to use the script tag to add all our JavaScript. So that is one way you can be able to add JavaScript. Now, let me just say I want to show us exactly how JavaScript works. So what I can do is I can give you some sort of an output. There's so many ways you can give output on JavaScript. One of the ways to give output is to say document.write. That means that you're going to overwrite everything on your browser window with the content that I have provided here. So for example, let's say I have heading 1 here. Then heading 1, I'll say welcome to JS. Then I come down here and I'll say something like this is our first JavaScript document or code. So if I was to run this on the browser, and I'll run them side by side so that we're able to see them as we're working on, you can see I have heading 1, and this is our JavaScript page. So what I'll do here, I'll probably come back to my Visual Studio Code window over here. Then I'll probably put them side by side like that. All right. So if I, okay, then I'll collapse this. So if I was to run this, you can see it writes this. Now when I come down here and I say something like document.write, and I'll say welcome to JS from script, you'll be able to see that this text over here will override the document. So I have to refresh it. I don't know why it's here. So you see it's going to output this portion of document over here. So maybe I could put here something like a break. So you can see it's going to add this text over here dynamically. So I have been able to add this text over here dynamically without necessarily changing the contents of the page as you're seeing on the top here. And that's really how JavaScript works. This is just a classic example. Now, as I was mentioning, there are two ways you can add JavaScript. I can either add it using the script tag in line like this, or I can use an external document. So using an external document, what I'll do here, and I'll come here and I'll create a file here, and I'll say welcome.js. So welcome.js. Now when I use the welcome.js, I'll simply pick this output, I'll cut it, and I will put it here. And probably maybe what I'll do is I'll simply say from external document. So from external document, so what I want to do is I want to execute this code so that it appears on the page without necessarily adding it here. So what I'll do here, I'll still use the script tag. So you could use that. So you could use that. That is one way. The other way is you will still use the script tag but with the source attribute. So you add the source attribute telling it exactly where to get the file. So this one is going to be welcome.js. So if I do that and I refresh the page, mm, welcome here, welcome is here. Why is it not doing that? That's strange. It should have actually written that. Uh, Let me see. Has it loaded it? It should have actually loaded it. Let me see if it has loaded it. So it did not find welcome.js from the root. Where did we place it? Let's see. So welcome.js is inside welcome.js. Okay. Then this other file that is saying JS introduction or JS introduction is inside web fonts. So I made a mistake inside web fonts and I added this file. So I will cut it. Then I'll put it on the root. Yeah. So now you can see it should come. So now you can see I have that code written down here. So my mistake, I had put rather the file in different locations from where it was supposed to be originally. So usually they're supposed to be in the same directory. Then of course you need to refer. Now, again, as you can see, when it comes to this file over here, I can come and add a lot of code moving forward. I can say this is another line. It will repeat and say another line. And we can go on and on. So you can see this way now, I am able to write my JavaScript separate from my HTML file. The only thing I need to do is to link them up together. As I said, this is an old practice. So even if I was to put this at the top here somewhere, you can see it will still be able to work. But now what it has done is that it has brought this script and output the text before it loaded the other portion. So I can actually delay this one and tell it to wait until everything has loaded, then execute this particular script. But that is those are really things that you might not do now. But as I mentioned before, for me, a good practice is usually to put all your JavaScript just before you close your HTML document, so that now it waits for everything else to load before it executes your JavaScript code. So these are the two ways in which you can be able to load JavaScript on your or append JavaScript on your pages. You use the script tag and then you put the JavaScript directly inside the script tag, or you can introduce a separate file that has JavaScript, and you can see the separate file does not include the script tags. It only includes the JavaScript code that you want to add. Then from there, you use the source attribute and you point to the source where that has your JavaScript code. Then you just inject that into your HTML file and execute it on the browser. So this is the most preferred method when you're doing your projects. But for purposes of training, I will be using this first method so that we are able to see the structure versus the JavaScript and how they work together, similar to what I was using in styles. All right. So that is how you place your JavaScript file. Now let's look at output. How do you output JavaScript content? Now there are basically four ways in which you can output JavaScript content, and I'll just show us how to do that right now. So if you wanted to output JavaScript content, the first way will be to use something called either inner HTML or inner text. Let me say I have a paragraph here, and the paragraph has an ID of remote text, right? So inside this remote text, I want to input the data here. So data from remote source. Data from remote source comes from here. So data from remote source is going to be coming inside here. Now I can go ahead and apply a style there. So I can come here and say style so that we're able to see it properly. So it's style. Then I'll say the remote text. Then I'll probably give it something like color will be red, so that at least now it appears in red, as you can see over here. Now I'm just trying to put everything together, what you've learned before, how you publish, how you style, and all that kind of stuff, then how to use JavaScript. Now, if I wanted to replace this text with my name, what I'll simply come and do is, as I said, I'll use the older method, which is the first method. Here, I'll put my script here. Then inside the script, I'll simply select the element. So I'll simply say document dot don't worry about this query selector, or you can use get element by ID. Then I'll get remote text. Then I use dot inner text is equals to, then I can say now my name. Now if I was to do that, you can see now it has replaced this text that we had inside here with my name, and the page has not refreshed. So if I put something like just Richard over here, you'll see the entire page will not load. Only the portion where that I want to change will load for me. So inner text is one of the ways within which you can output JavaScript. Then you can also use what you call inner HTML. So I'll mask that. Then I'll say inner HTML. So instead of inner text, I'll say inner HTML. HTML is in capital letters like that. Then I'll say Richard from inner HTML. So you can see either when I use either inner text or inner HTML, the effect I have is exactly the same. So that is the second way within which you can be able to output the data. The other way you can output the data is probably maybe to show a message box that pops up so that you're able to see the name. So we're going to discuss variables in a short time, but let me assume I have a variable here called my name. So I'll have variable my name is equals to Richard from variable. Then if I wanted to check what this variable has, I can say the window object, then I call the alert function and I'll put my name, something like that. So you can see at that point, when I run this window, you'll see now it has my name, Richard from var, which means that is another way that I can be able to output this data. Now, the last way, which is what you're going to be using 90% of the time, is using what we call the console window. So we're going to use the console window to be able to check what variables have. So for example, let me say I have constant tax, and tax is equal to 0.16 times 100. I think that should give me 16. Then I want to check what the variable tax is holding. So what I can say here is console.log. Console has different methods, so I'll use the log function, console.log method. Then I'll simply say the tax is, then I'll put my tax. Now, I'll not see it over here, but when I right click this and I'll say inspect and I come to console, you'll see the tax is 16, and that is this line over here. Now, why I don't like using this method, you can see this is telling you that this instruction is on line 67, but in actual sense, this instruction is on line 29. Some Things have been embedded on this page, as you can see here. A lot of things have been added, not by us, by but some other things that we are using on the page. Like this portion has added quite a bit of text here, so it means that there's a bit of confusion in terms of the line number where this thing is coming from. But nonetheless, that is why I prefer sometimes to add. I prefer to use a separate JavaScript file, because if I use a separate JavaScript file, it will tell me the exact line number where that error is coming from. But what is important is using the console.log. So when I console log, I can be able to see the variable that I'm logging from this external source over here. Are you together? So now that is how you output your data, and that's very, very important. Use inner text, use inner HTML, use window.alert, or you can use console.log. So either of the ways you will be able to output your JavaScript code. And here, these are really the things that you're going to do, because we'll be changing a few things on our page or stuff like that. Of course, we are going to be using different properties or entities as far as our elements are concerned, but the general idea are the four that I have listed here. So that is how you output or you test your JavaScript variables for values or things like that. Now, as you can see, for those who have a bit of experience with JavaScript, you'll be seeing that most of the time I have not included semicolon in my instructions. Semicolons are optional in JavaScript. So if I put the semicolon after each statement, that is the standard way, but I prefer to do it differently. So whether you put the semicolons or not, it will still be able to work correctly so long as your syntax is okay. So in my case, I don't like the semicolons because I use other programming languages that don't support semicolons. I also use others that are strict with semicolons. So it's going to be a matter of preference of you deciding how well you want to use or not to use the semicolon. So for my case, I will opt not to use the semicolons, and the code will still be able to work as effectively. So it's not a requirement per se. Now, also in JavaScript, there are things called keywords. So in any programming language, we have keywords, or what they call reserved words. So reserved words are the words that mean something very specific to the compiler. So it means you cannot be able to use them. They mean something specific. So for example, if I use something like for is a reserved word for doing a loop. So I cannot call a variable for and I call it zero. That is going to be a problem. So as you can see from here, this is actually an error. I can't use for and assign it to zero, because for means I want to loop through something. I cannot use the word while, for example. That also is a reserved word. I cannot use the word key, for example. Key is also a reserved word, though key might be overwritten, but key is also a reserved word. I cannot use the word if is a reserved word. And there's so many others, like let is also a reserved word. I cannot say let like that. That is also a reserved word. So these reserved words mean something very special to the compiler, and as such, you cannot use them for variable names. And again, they are reserved words, so they mean something very specific to the compiler. So we want to make sure that we avoid using them, or we use them as appropriately. Okay, so that is a very good primer as far as getting started with JavaScript is concerned. Now, the next thing I want us to discuss is what we call comments. So comments in JavaScript. Now I've just added a couple of comments in JavaScript here, as you can see. So comments are the instructions that we are going to write as part of our code, but these instructions are not going to be executed in any way. So let me just get rid of all this, then put in a script like that. Then inside the script, I can begin describing what the script does. So let me say I want to create a function that adds two numbers and outputs the third. So there are two types of comments. We have what we call multi-line comments. Multi-line comments are the comments that are going to span more than one line. So if you want to do comments that are going to span more than one line, you will use forward slash star forward star again, then backslash. So anything within these two things will be treated as a comment. So here I can say function that takes in two variables, adds them up, and outputs the total. So you can see here, I have three lines and all of them are enclosed inside a comment. So when you're talking about comments, you can use this format, the forward slash star backslash, then everything in between them is going to be a comment. And it can be multiple lines, they can even be 100 lines. So I can simply say here, the author of this is Richard. I can put the date when it was done is on 20th June 2025, and of course the revision, this is the first one. Then of course now I can explain what it does. So you can see, and you'll find a lot of these kinds of comment in most JavaScript codes, so that at least you're able to know who wrote this, when was it written, what is the revision, what does it do, what do the variables mean, and all this kind of stuff. So this is one way that you can be able to add comments in your JavaScript code. Now, the other way you can add comments in JavaScript code is just by using two double slashes. When you use two double forward slashes like that, that is also a comment, but that's only going to be a comment on one line. So I can say this is a one line comment, which means if I go to the next line, then the comment is disabled. So if I say here, let x is equals to 1, you can see then the next line now is disabled. The comment only applies on the line where I have defined it. So if you put two forward slashes, it means that that is a single line comment. But if you use the forward slash and the star, then star and backslash, then it means that it's a multi-line comment and anything inside there will be treated as such. Okay? So up to that point, I think we are okay, right? So the next thing I want us to discuss are variables in JavaScript. Now, all programming languages use what we call variables. Variables are placeholders. They are the tools or the things we use to store we use to store value that we are working with. Say, for example, if I want to work on tax, I can be able to create a variable for holding the gross amount, then another variable to hold the tax. Then, as I'm doing my calculation, I can store my values in those particular variables and I am good to go. Let's just see how that works out. Now, when it comes to variables, we are going to have something like there are three ways to declare variables. So I'll put a comment again, three ways to declare variables. We'll discuss them in detail. The first one is const var. Var defines variable. This is an older way of doing things, but of course, some people still use it today. Still accessible. So I can say something like var x is equals to 10. Then if I wanted to output the value of 10, I can simply say console.log X. So I'm expecting to see in my browser 10, as you can see over here. So that's pretty straightforward. So var is a keyword saying I want to define a variable. X is the name of the variable. Equal to means I want to assign this value to 10. And by the way, you don't have to do it this way. You can say var x, then you can say x is equals to 10. That is still accessible. It's only that if you do programming a number of times, it will be much easier to declare the variable and assign it a value at the same time. Just give it a default value so that now you can be able to just use it immediately instead of executing two instructions prior to getting out your outcome. But you define a variable var x, then you can assign a value to that variable, which means I'm taking 10 and I'm storing it inside x. So every time I want to work with x, so if I say y is equals to 2 times x, then I console.log y, console.log y. So you'll see down here, I have now y is 20. Now I can put the value so that you're able to see the difference. So x is that and y is that. So you can see x is 10 and y is 20. So this is very important when it comes to variable. Now that also brings me to something else, that is values, that is rather what we call literals versus variables. So if I output this x, whatever I'm outputting inside quotation marks like that, that is a literal. It means I want to literally output it as it is. It's called a string literal. So it's going to be output exactly as I have said it. The other one is a variable, which means it's going to pick the value of that variable and replace it with it. So whenever we are outputting things, most of the time we'll be working with string literals and variables. So literal is something that I want to output exactly as it is. It can be some text, it can be a name, it could be a label, anything that I want to be able to help assist me troubleshoot or identify something. I'm going to output it as a string literal, right? But anything I want to get its value, then I will use a variable instead. So those are the two differences between literals and string values. Literals and variable values rather. Sorry about that. Again, I'll repeat. To make our experience easier, just go to the email that I invited you with as far as the class are concerned. Say you are going to attend so that when you're coming to class, you don't have to disturb us as we are moving along. I don't know how many times I need to stress this. People need to follow instructions. People need to follow instructions so that we are able to do things that's supposed to be done. Remember, you guys want to become programmers. But when you become programmers, you're going to follow instructions. You're going to read documentation and all these kind of things. If you can't be able to follow simple instructions like the ones I have given, it might be a bit of a challenge to follow instructions from your lead dev on things that you're supposed to do because you'll want to do things the way you want to do them, the way you feel it's right. So follow instructions. If I say that I've sent you an email, accept that invitation so that you come into the class quietly. Please kindly do that. All right. Don't distract the others who came in early and are already concentrating because you want to come in late. First of all, coming in late is rude. Then distracting others while you're coming in is even more rude. So kindly just bear that in mind. And I think moving forward, I'm not going to accept anybody who comes to class late and they want to ask me to let them join the class in between. If you want to come in late, just accept the link and join the class at your convenience. But join silently so the others don't get distracted by you trying to come in. Okay, so I was discussing the concept of variables, and I said you can declare variables like this using var, then the variable name, then you can assign a value to that variable, then you can access the value of that variable. Like, for example, in this case, I'm saying go to the console window and output the following value. The first one is a string literal, like x with a full colon, which is what you're seeing is here. Then the next one is x, which means the value that is stored in x, which in this particular case is 10. The another instruction says another variable is y, and y is equals to twice the value of x. So y is twice the value of x. Whatever the value of x was, in this particular case, x is 10. So it means that y is going to be 20. Then I'm coming ahead and saying output the value of y as a string literal, then what is stored in y, which is now 20 over here. Okay, so that's literally how you use variables. Now, there are certain rules when it comes to naming your variables. Now, you can see I've used very simple variable names here, which is x, but there are rules for naming our variables. Rules for variable naming. There are certain rules that we must adhere to when you're naming our variables. And one of the rules is I'll put a multi-line comment here so that you're able to put all the rules in one place. The first rule when it comes to naming your variables is that it must start with a letter. Must start with a letter of the alphabet. So your variable name must start with a letter. What that means is I cannot declare a variable here and call it one Richard. Then I give it a value like 0. You can see outrightly that will not work out. It has to start with a letter. And as you can see, it will tell you it cannot immediately follow a string letter. So it means a variable name must start with a letter. So if I put Richard, now I can put 1 at the end. That is allowed, so long as it starts with a letter. Okay, that is a must. Number two, Variables cannot contain special characters other than an underscore. An underscore is this one. That dash pointing downwards. So I can't say Richard minus one. That doesn't work like that. Or I can not say Richard at one, or I cannot say Richard times one, or I cannot say Richard and one, or I cannot say Richard and percentage one. It doesn't work like that. The only special character allowed here is underscore. By the way, even space is not allowed. So only an underscore is allowed. No special characters other than an underscore. Okay? The other thing is that variable names must be unique within a scope. So the third one is variable names must be unique within a scope. Variable names must be unique within the scope or a scope. Now, it will depend on what kind of keyword you're using to declare your variables. Like, for example, when I'm using var, it means that this variable can be declared. When I'm using var, it means a variable can be redeclared. But if I'm using something like let or const, which are the newer ways of doing JavaScript, then it means that the variables cannot be redeclared. I'm going to explain the differences between those three keywords in a moment. Now, the other thing about variables is that they must be less than 256 characters. Cannot be more than 256 characters long. I don't know why you'd want to use a variable name that is that long anyway. So, but the thing is that when you're talking about variables, you just need to make sure that the length of the variable name does not exceed 256 characters. These ones are the things that we must adhere to. Then we have another things which are best practices. Let me just call these ones best practices. So one of the best practices is one, you need to give your variables meaning name. Give your variables meaningful names. So don't just call your variables X or Y. Say what they are. This is gross tax. This is basic pay. This is first name. This is last name. This is date of birth. This is year of birth. This is gender. This is father's name. The likes. So give your variables meaningful names. Don't just give them some random name that doesn't make any sense. It will work out. It's only that it will be more difficult to debug the program if as compared to if you use meaningful names, because I'll be able to see this variable I'm expecting this kind of value, and if I'm not getting that, it means that probably I'm assigning the wrong value to different variables. So that way it makes it easier for you to be able to troubleshoot your code. So that's one of the best practices. Give your variables meaningful names. Then, of course, other best practices would include scoping, scope variables as appropriate. Now I'm going to explain this in a short while because depending on how we work with variables, there'll be differences as to how these things work. And I'll just go straight ahead and I'll show you why this scoping is very important. Like I had said, there are three ways that we can define our variables, and we use keywords to define variables. So put comments here and say keywords to define variables. Keywords used to define variables are as follows. One, we have what you call var, var. var is used to define variables. Then the other one is let, and the other one is const. So these are the three ways const. These are the three ways within which or how we can be able to define variables in JavaScript. Now, they have their differences, which you're going to see how that works out. Now, var, as I said, is the older way of doing it, and var is not scoped, which means I can define a variable. Let's say, for example, I have a function here. We're going to work with functions later on that takes two variables a and b, and then uh, outputs c, which is a plus b, something of that sort. Now, this is a very simple function that takes a and b, then outputs c. I don't know why it's giving me that error. I don't know why it's giving me that error. Um, that should actually be okay. That should actually be okay. Is there something I'm missing out here? It looks good. Why is it giving me jitters? That actually looks so good. That actually looks so good. So what's the problem here? Oh, sorry. My bad. I didn't give the function a name. I didn't give the function a name. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Function calculate sum numbers. Sum numbers. Then it returns C, which is A plus B. I didn't need to return C. I didn't to define C as a variable, but you get the idea. So now what happens here is if I say A is equals to 10 and B is equals to 15, then I simply say console.log, then I say sum numbers, then I say A and B. I'll be able to probably get 25 on the browser over here, as you can see, which is actually A plus B. If I was to change this one to 100, then I'll see that this is now 115, which is totally awesome. So now, when it comes to variable declaration, I can let here var A is that and var B is that. Then I can come down here and say again var A is equals to 80. Now what happens? If I do that, now you're going to see it becomes 95. What happens is I declared A here and I have redeclared A here again. So that's what var does. It allows you to be able to redeclare a variable, but that is also a problem on of its own. If you're talking about software development, it means that you would be able to make mistakes, logical errors, so to speak. So that is very, very important for you to know, and that's why we stopped using var. This is not so bad, but it's equally not so good if you ask me. Okay, so that's how var works out. Now, then there's the second one, which is let. Now, if I was to use let here, so I'll say let a is 100. Now you can see then let again b is 15. I can't come here and say let a is equals to 80 because this scope is the same. Remember, the let is scoped, so this is block scoped. So if I'm talking about the same scope, all of them are in the same scope, which is the script tag, which is home. So if they're in the same scope, then it will not allow me to declare. So as you can see down here, if I try to declare I'm told I cannot declare the block scope variable A because it has already been declared in this scope. So this will not be able to work out with let, which is a good thing. Moving forward, it allows me to be able to make sure that at least at the end of the day, I don't declare variables that I don't need to do. So that's very, very important. Now, the const is also block scoped, but const is going to be used for things whose value are not going to change. For example, I can let a is equals to 100, but I can come here and say a is equals to 75. Now, this is not redeclaration, this is value reassignment. I'm just reassigning the value. So if I did that, a was declared and given a value of 100, then I change the value to 75. So if I come down here, it will mean that if I'm calling the function sum numbers a and b, it will take the last value I assigned to a and the value I assigned to b, add them together to give me 90. So 75 plus 15 gives me 90. So this is variable reassignment. Variable reassignment. So I'm basically just reassigning A to a value of 75. I'm not redefining it, I'm just changing its value. So if you want to have a variable whose value you can change, then you use let. But if you want to have a variable whose value you cannot change, then you use const. For example, let me say I want to declare something like VAT rate. VAT rate is 16%. It does not change over time. So it will always be more or less 16%. So I can't come down here and say again, VAT rate is equals to 17. This will not work out, right? This will not work out because as you can see here, it's going to tell me I'm trying to assign a variable, a constant to a variable. I'm trying to change the value of a constant variable. That does not work out. So I cannot reassign the value I assign to a constant value. So here, the difference is value cannot be reassigned. And that's very, very important. So you can see I've discussed the three different things using the same example. Var will allow you to declare a variable. It will allow you to change to reassign the variable value, and at the same time, it allows you to access it outside its own scope. So again, if I declared a variable here, maybe say let x is equals to 10, I can't come here and say console.log x. That x will not be defined. As you can see down here, x is 10. That's strange. Ideally, I was not expecting. Well, okay, it's a function. Ideally, I was not. Yeah, I have x here, so that's why. Sorry, I had x at the top. That's why. So you can see if I try to access x outside the function, I'm not able to access it because it is going to be scoped within this particular function. So again, that's another very important thing. So if I use let, the scope is going to be very important. Only the scope where I have defined the variable, it's where it's going to be accessible. But outside the scope, it's not going to be accessible. So if I declare it in a larger scope, then it's available on the larger scope. If I define it in a smaller scope, it's also only available in the smaller scope. And another thing var and let, since we are looking like them as being almost similar but having subtle differences. When it comes to var, something like this, I can say y is equals to 30. Then I can say var y. Then I can simply say here console.log y. Now that first portion will work. So let me just remove this because it's going to give me problems. You can see here, I have declared y as 30. So y is equals to 30, then I declare it. This is called variable hoisting. Hoisting means I can't be able to use a variable before I declare it. I can be able to use a variable before I declare it. And that's very, very powerful when it comes to hoisting, which is something we're going to probably look at in the future. This would work out if I'm only using var. I can't use let for these kinds of shenanigans. So I can't say here y is equals to 30, then let y, then console.log y. You can see I'm trying to access y before it has been initialized. So that is the difference. When it comes to how to use let, how to use var, and how to use const, it is going to be very imperative for us to decide or to understand exactly how these three things work. And once you understand how the three things work, then and only then will you be able to write very good logic using variables and avoid what we call runtime errors or logical errors. So logical errors are errors in logic. You overwrite a variable, you assign it a wrong value, or things like that. It makes it very, very easy for us to be able to trap those kinds of errors if we understand how these three variable declaration blocks work out. Remember, var is the older method and it has its own advantages. You can redeclare a variable, you can reassign a value to the variable, and you can also hoist a variable. Hoist means you can use the variable before you declare it. Okay, so those are the three main properties that makes var very good. But at the same time, those three things also gives it a problem because you can overwrite your variables and you can assign wrong values to it because it is not block scoped. So so key takeaways for this, and I'll begin with let. The first one is let. The first one is let. So let allows variable hoisting, which means you can't be able to use the variable before you declare it. You can redeclare a variable. So I declare a variable, then I redeclare it again, overriding the initial one. Then you can also reassign its value. You can reassign its value, which means you can give it a different value. Then, of course, lastly, it is not scoped, meaning you can access it from anywhere within your program. Well, it depends on what kind of program you're writing, but as I said, that can be a problem of its own. So that's not let rather, but that is var. That is var. That's not let, that is var. Now let on the other hand is one, it is scoped, which means you can only access it within the scope that you declared it. If you want to declare it, if you want to access it from anywhere within your program, declare it globally. So if you want it accessible at any point within your program, declare it globally. Then number two, it cannot be hosted, meaning you cannot be able to use it before you declare it. Then it cannot be redefined within its own scope. It cannot be redefined within its scope. So that's very important. So once I declare it, I cannot come again and declare it for the second time. It's going to give me a logical error, a syntax error rather, because I'm trying to reassign a variable that I have already declared. So that's not going to work out. Then, of course, lastly, it does not. It can allow you to change this variable, can change or can reassign variable. You can reassign the variable. So that's the good thing about let. And that's why you'll see most of the time I'm going to be using let instead of var. Var has several things, but the several things it has, as you can see over there, are also its downfall. They are the things that causes it to have issues. Then thirdly is the const variable. Const is used const. With const, you cannot redeclare. First of all, let's start with it is scoped, which means it has a certain scope. So where you define it is where it's going to be used. Very, very useful. Then it cannot be hoisted, which means you cannot use it before you define it. Then thirdly, it cannot be redeclared. You cannot redeclare a const variable, and neither can you reassign its value. You cannot reassign its value. So these are very important because once I want something to be constant, something like when I want something to be constant, something like VAT rate, I don't want this VAT rate to change. I want it to remain 16% consistently throughout. So if I was to make any changes to it, then that would mean something else. And that's where now we use const. Things that we don't expect to change over the course of our program, we'll use const. So where is const very, very useful? When you're declaring objects or array, so useful when declaring objects or arrays or constant values like tax rates, value of pi, and anything that you consider a constant, then the const would be very, very important for us to be able to use. So, and again, as I've mentioned, that is very key when it comes to variables. So you've said a variable is a memory location where we store values that you're working with. There are rules for naming our variables. Then there are methods for declaring our variables, which is either var, let, or const. And I've explained the difference between the three of them. And now, of course, from there we can decide how to use these values. Now, let me give you a very classic example of how we can use this. Let's say we have a user interface and we want to be able to calculate the tax rate and output the value on the browser. I'm just trying to show us exactly how we can be able to use these three scopes that we have learned so that we understand how things work for the better. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to remove all this piece of code by commenting it. So there is nothing there. Then on my page here, I'm going to change a few things. Like for example, I'm going to put an input and I'm going to call it total amount, and it's going to be an input of type number. Then I'm going to give it an ID of total amount like that. So probably put a label here and I'll call it total amount, and I'll put here total amount like that. So that should be able to tell me the total amount. Then of course I'm going to put a break here. Then I'm going to put a label with an ID of VAT amount. So the VAT amount there, I'm going to put VAT total or amount actually. Then I'll put the VAT down here. By default, it's going to be 0.00. So VAT is going to be 0.00. So if I typed an amount here, then I maybe what I could do is I can add a button here. Calculate VAT. Then I'll say calculate, calculate VAT. So when I add that button here, calculate VAT, so I'll put a value here, 567. Then when I say calculate VAT, it should be able to output for me the VAT down here. That's kind of like how these things work out, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to come here and I'll declare some variables. So declare variables. So the first variable is going to be a constant. This box here is not going to change, right? This box here is not going to change, so I can declare it as a constant. But then again, I can just pick the value that it has. Okay, so the value that it has would be probably something like I could simply say I want to create a function here that calculates VAT. So this function does not accept any input, so I'm going to get all my input. So here I'm going to declare constant total amount, and I want to get the total amount from this field over here. So I'll simply say here it is document dot. Most people use get element by ID. Then you can give the ID of the element, which in this particular case I have called it total amount, as you can see over there. So I'll bring this down here. Then I'll put dot value. So that's going to go into the document, get an element with an ID of total amount, then extract its value. So first thing I can do is to test if actually it is picking that value. So I'll simply say here console.log total amount. Total amount, then I put total amount like that. But this is just a function, it is not called. So what I'm going to do is I want to, when I click on this, then the function is called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare this one as also a constant. So I'll have a constant here. Const VAT calculate button like that. VAT calculate button like that. Then this is going to be document.getElement by ID. You can use other selectors. You can use other CSS selectors that we have. So that button was given an ID of calculate VAT, which is what I have here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add what we call an event listener. So I'll simply say take this button and listen to when somebody clicks on it. So I'll say dot add event listener, and the event listener here is going to be the click event. Then run the following function. That's how JavaScript works. So the function I want to run is calculate VAT. So what I've done here, I have declared this as a constant because I don't expect its value to change. So first of all, it is scoped, it cannot be hoisted, it cannot be declared, and I cannot reassign its value. So the value has to remain consistent. All right. So that's why I'm using const. So declaring this calculate VAT button as a constant means that all these things are going to apply to it. So you can see it's an object. So definitely I'm using const because it is useful when you're declaring objects, which is in this case, that's a classic example. Once I declare it, then now I have it as a variable. Then I can go ahead and say add an event listener, which means add an event listener. When somebody clicks on it, then run this function called calculate VAT. Then that function is going to execute this code segment that we have inside here. We're going to see how this is implemented later on in the future using practical example. But for this case, I just wanted to understand how you put it all together in terms of variable declaration and where we use var and let and const. Actually, rarely do I use var. I use let and const because of the issues that var has. So I just want to show us how you use that. Now, in this particular case, the first thing I want to do is to check if this variable total amount is actually containing the figure that I'll get from here. So I'll type something here like 18,500. Then I'll click on calculate VAT. Then I can see here the amount is actually 18,500, which is what I have outputted down here, right? So that is actually working. So the next thing is I want to declare another constant, which is called VAT amount. And maybe another constant is VAT rate, and I'll say VAT rate is 16. Okay. Then I can have another constant that says, or I can put another variable that maybe say let VAT amount is equal to VAT rate multiplied by total amount divided by 100. Then now I can come and output the value inside here. So again, I can define that place where I want to put my answer as a constant because it's an object. So I can say VAT amount label will be document dot get element by ID, document dot get element by ID. Then I'll just go into my document and pick that ID. In this particular case, it's VAT amount. Now you can see why I give them IDs because IDs now help me to be able to pick them up uniquely. Okay. Then when I come down here, I'll simply say this VAT amount label dot. Then another output is inner text. Then I'll put is equals to then VAT amount, like that. Now, if I was to type here something like 10,000, then I say calculate VAT, you can see the amount is actually 1600. And that now gives me the power so you can be able to see really how JavaScript helps me to work with my documents as I move along. This is really powerful. This is a very simple example, but you can see this is equally very, very powerful as we are moving along. So the key here is when do I use const? When do I use let? And of course, based on how we output variables, how do we output these variables on our pages? How do we get these variables from our pages and stuff like that? So this is the kind of stuff that you want to be able to master how to do and as we move along. It is extremely powerful and helps us to be able to do things very, very easy. As you can see, it doesn't matter what value I put here. If I start with 7,800 and I say calculate, it's going to calculate. If I come back and say 100,000, again, it's going to calculate it. If I say I want 256,800, it's going to still calculate it and so forth and so forth. So that's what JavaScript does. It makes your pages animated. It gives life to your page. None of those things can be done with HTML or CSS. It is only JavaScript that can allow you to be able to achieve such. Okay? Now, that is very important. Again, what's key here is what do we do when we want to declare variables? Besides knowing how to declare variables, you can see all my variable names start with a letter. They don't have special characters other than underscore, but I don't like using underscores anyway. Or you can do camel notation. So what I forgot here to say is that when you're declaring your variables, you might also want to use camel notation. Use camel notation when declaring variables or when providing variable names. Camel notation is whenever you expect a space, you can be able to use uh, an uppercase letter so that you're able to read the words easily. Now, I don't like doing that, so instead of VAT calculator, I could say something like VAT calculate button here. Something like that. When I do this, variable JavaScript is case sensitive. You can see now this button is not able to work. You see, if I do that, then this button is not able to work. I have to go and change it to exactly as it has been defined. So the case is very, very important in JavaScript. That's why most of the time you're going to see me not using the camel notation. But again, it's a good practice. It's not a requirement. It's just a good practice to be able to make sure that your code is consistent. Okay, so that is key. So of course, from here now, if I say 890 and I calculate, that should now be able to work out easily. All right, that is a mouthful. That is JavaScript. Those are versions of JavaScript that we've discussed. Then we've also discussed variable declarations. We have discussed comments. We have also looked at how to output data. We have looked at keywords. And finally, we have started working with variables. We said there are two ways you can output values in JavaScript. Either you use a string literal or you use a variable name. So you can access them by either of the portion. So from here, I could simply say something like VAT amount. Then I put plus. Sorry. Then I can put that. So if I did this, well, it's not that, it's plus. So if I put this, you can see it does that, but I can put a space here. So if I put, you can see it now puts a string literal, then the variable value over there. So really, that's what this has been all about. Okay. Do you guys, by any chance, have another class running at the moment or at this point, or I can continue? I'm seeing it's past 11. I'm just asking if you have another class at this point or if I should continue. You can chat. If you can't speak, I'm asking that because we came late and we've not been able to cover what we had anticipated to cover for today. That's why I am asking. Felix, Michael, Shirley, uh, Michael, what does that mean? We carry on or we stop at that? It means we take a break. Okay, no problem. We'll take a break at that. I'll share with you this material on how to get started with JavaScript. I just want you to keep in mind that this is the heartbeat of what we are supposed to be doing. This is actually what makes the greatest change that we could possibly have as far as animating our pages are concerned. So as you can see, from where we have gotten started, it makes it very, very powerful for us to be able to now manipulate the DOM and capture data and process it and give it back to the user in ways that are flexible and allows us to be able to do it without necessarily making adjustments to the page. So I think I'll take a break at that. Then I have scheduled another class tomorrow. I think from is it from 4 p.m.? I think it's from 4 p.m. Yes, from 4 p.m. to probably around 6 p.m. or something of that sort. Kindly talk to the others and make sure that you attend it because we are behind. The exams have already been set. They're going to be done on 17th, and everything is going to be inclusive. Now, the other coming week, we're going to do a small cut on what we have covered so far. I have not seen some of the assignment as of now for some people. Just kindly make sure that they are available. I will only give you marks for for what you make available. What you don't make available, that's going to be up to you. So kindly talk to the rest of your team members, tell them that assignments are due. I'm being lenient. Not supposed to be begging you to submit assignments. I'm just being lenient because I know what it means. You don't submit those assignments and you come back and ask for marks. I don't know where I'm going to get that marks for you. And as I'm saying again, we have another class tomorrow. Make sure you attend it. And when we come the next Friday, we're going to have our class for 1 hour, then you're going to have our cut for another 1 hour. So kindly make sure you let all the others attend so that you're able to achieve this effectively. Okay? So without further ado, I think I'll take a break at that. Then we meet tomorrow at 4 p.m. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.